Hello. This is strange with a microphone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Welcome. This is probably as strange for you as it is for me, actually being back in front of a crowd again. I keep expecting your faces to turn into little like blue squares with your initials in halfway through. Hopefully that won't happen.
Give me time.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking it'd be quite cool to do kind of like a ceremonial burning of a webcam. But after this conference's track record with fire alarms, that's probably not the best thing. Okay, so welcome. My name's Stephen Haunts, and you are hopefully here to watch Hacking Humans, Social Engineering, Attack and Prevention. So we're going to talk a little bit about what social engineering is. We're going to talk about some techniques that social engineers use. This isn't an instruction manual. But then we're going to talk about how to protect against social engineering and impersonation. And I'm going to give you some resources and books that you can go and read at your leisure. So social engineering generally leads to illegal activity. That's not what I'm condoning in this. I'm not trying to teach you how to be criminals. But by learning kind of the mindset and the process that an impersonator will go through to try and get information from someone, it's kind of useful to know how they do it so that you know how to protect yourself from it. So this is about mitigation and prevention, because you don't want to end up like Bob here, because that is pretty much where you'll end up going if you try and con people. So this is a huge subject. I couldn't even attempt to do justice to the entire thing in 1 hour. People spend their entire careers studying this sort of thing, because it's all about psychology. Oh, here we go, it's going again. The projector's not playing ball, so we may have to do part of this without slides, that's fine. Yeah, so it's a huge subject. I mean, you could literally spend your life studying this subject. It's all about psychology and sort of how humans interact. So what is social engineering? So social engineering is the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. And there's kind of 3 different types of social engineering that we think of. Okay, so we've got phishing, which is one that everyone's probably most familiar with. That's where you receive an email trying to get you to click a link. Commonly from like your bank, they might send you an email saying, you know, you've gone over your overdraft, and then you think, oh God, and you click on the link to log in, but actually you're being redirected to a dodgy site. Vishing is similar to phishing. I don't know if you come up with these names. But vishing is basically telephone scams. So you get someone phoning you up, say from the tax office, saying that you owe lots of money, you have to pay now. You know, it's a typical phone scam. My dad keeps on getting ones where people keep telling him he's got a virus on his computer and he has to install a virus killer or some expensive software. Which is not true, because we switched him over to an iPad years ago for his own good. And the other one is impersonation, which is mostly what we're going to focus on in this talk. So examples of phishing that you might be familiar with. So typically it might be someone asking for help or trying to get you to help them with something. So someone pretending to be one of your friends, that's spoofing an email. It could be someone asking for donations. This is quite a common one. So if there's like a big disaster, like an earthquake somewhere, you sometimes get a load of scammers setting up fake donations to try and get you to donate to that cause when actually they're stealing the money. That's been a massive problem over recent years. Asking for information and just trying to get you to provide information, like log-on details, bank credentials. Again, yeah, asking for verification is a way of trying to get you to verify bank details and log-on details. And phishing generally the emails these days tend to look very professional, so sometimes it can be very hard to actually tell a fake email from a good email. They'll use logos, good web design and compelling storytelling to try and sort of tug at your heartstrings to get you to give up information or money. So these emails tend to have lots of links and external references that seem legitimate. So it's like the old adage of trying to bury a lie within truths. That's kind of like what a lot of these websites do. So there'll be a lot of legitimate information on these emails or websites, but buried in there is something malicious that they're trying to get you to do. They might use real names of successful people to try and lure victims in, you know, sort of try to, you know, say that they're legitimate through association. But the biggest thing they're trying to do is typically get you to click links which take you onto websites which look legitimate. Or maybe they are legitimate, but you're going through a third-party proxy to get to their site. So phishing, as we said, tends to be over the phone. You get people phoning you up, leaving messages. Tax office scam is a very popular one. Especially when I do my company accounts, I start to get, my company accounts are due in November, so I'm kind of expecting over the next 4 weeks that I'll probably start getting a lot of these scam phone calls. Tech support scams, like I said before, you've got a virus on your machine, just let us remote into your machine and we'll help you fix it. That's quite a common one. And people phoning up from the bank, which is quite a dangerous one because they might try and get you to, well, they'll say there's a problem with your account and you need to transfer your money into a safety account while they fix the problem, but really they're just stealing your money. Okay. So when people do phishing attacks, typically they've done their homework, so they will have a lot of information about you. That information may have come from a data breach somewhere, or they may be targeting you specifically. So generally they can do a lot of homework on you. That's called OSINT, Open Source Intelligence, which sounds quite cool, but really it's just finding out information off of LinkedIn, typically. They'll use compelling voice and speech to sound convincing. A lot of scammers will also have office ambience noises playing in the background to make it sound like they're actually in an office. I do apologise for this projector. It's going to give us a hard time, I think, today. So typically when you get these phone calls, they're trying to use a sense of urgency and danger to compel you to give up information or money there and then. So it's scare someone, get their adrenaline levels going, and then offer them kind of an immediate relief to that problem, which is how they try and get you. That's called fear and relief. And you also get some now, which will actually, you'll get one of these phone calls and then they'll put you through an IVR system. You get annoying phone menus that you go through. And they do that to make it seem like it's a legitimate company, but in actual fact, IVRs are incredibly easy to set up. So it's all about using urgency to make you act fast. That's basically what they're trying to do. They want you to act while you're on the phone. Typically, the best thing to do is just put the phone down. And the next one is impersonation. So this can be things like ID theft in the work area. And people basically taking on a persona of someone else to try and get information out of you. And we're going to be covering this in quite a bit of detail in a moment. So social engineers tend to come in lots of different forms. So your stereotypical hackers that you might see on TV. That's kind of what we normally associate with social engineering. Penetration testers, they're kind of like one of the legitimate forms of social engineering. So if your company hires pen testers to test your systems, they're not only going to be hacking physical servers, they're going to be trying to get around your staff as well, which is quite interesting. Because sometimes the easiest way into a system isn't trying to go through a firewall, it's trying to go through the people in your company, because they're much easier to manipulate. Then we've got things like spies, it all sounds quite cool. I don't know if anyone's seen that Spycraft program on Netflix at the moment. It's like 6 or 7 episodes about spying and all that sort of stuff. That's pretty cool. Identity thieves, so people doing data breaches, trying to steal information about you. Email addresses, phone numbers, addresses, all that sort of stuff. Disgruntled employees, this is a big one. We always say that the biggest threat to a company is its people. An even bigger threat is a disgruntled employee. So if you've been turned down for a promotion or you've not got a pay rise or a bonus, if you're generally pissed off with a company, that makes you quite dangerous to that company. I hope there's no recruiters in the room, because I always class recruiters as social engineers as well, because they're trying to get you to go for interviews. They want their 20% commission, however much it is they charge. So I kind of lump them into the social engineering brackets as well. So if there's any in the room, I apologise. And then things like governments and salespeople, but can anyone think of another type of social engineer that you might have in a domestic setting? Children, yeah. Those little sleep terrorists are brilliant at manipulating you. Well, my daughter is anyway. She can wrap you around her little finger and pretty much get anything she wants, because they use that sort of big, wide-eyed smile and grin. And then, before I know it, I've spent another 20 quid on Robux or whatever the in-game currency is. So why do people do this? Well, it works. People are easy to manipulate. And if you're trying to break into a system or steal corporate information, it's easier to go through the people than it is to go through the computer systems. That's just a natural fact of life. And as I said before, people are the biggest vulnerability in any organisation. It sounds horrible, you know, we're like, everyone's all about the people and we've got to be nice to the people, but actually they're your biggest threat. It also offers a path of least resistance. So, you know, trying to crack password files using hashcats, that's a lot of effort. Trying to get passwords out of people, especially if you threaten them, is quite easy. So in an organisation, typically the easiest people to target are going to be people who work in customer service. They generally have access to a lot of important information. So if you phone up a company to get help with something and they authenticate you, they've got all of your information on the screen, which makes them incredibly valuable to target. Delivery staff as well, can be quite easy to manipulate. So if you try and threaten or con like the DPD driver, you know, he's going to have access to your building, he's going to be in there delivering parcels. He could be a good way of getting into a company. And typically, you know, anyone on the phone that you're going to phone in an organisation who has access to information is a good target, and tech support as well. So there's been some quite famous social engineering cases around in the past. Some of these you may have heard of. So one of them is Kevin Mitnick. Very high profile, spent a lot of time in prison. And he started out by figuring out how to ride the LA bus system for free by getting past their ticketing system. And then he was implicated at the age of 16 in 1979 for breaking into DEC computers and basically stealing software. And that landed him 12 months in prison. But in the end, in his career, as it were, he's been charged with 14 counts of fraud, 8 cases of unauthorised access, and plus much more. And he's, you know, quite rightly spent a lot of time in prison. He's a reformed character these days, though. He now runs a security agency, teaching governments how to protect themselves from people like him. And if you're looking for a bit of light reading, I recommend all 3 of those books. So we've got Art of Intrusion, Art of Deception, and then his biography, which is Ghost in the Wire. All fantastic reads. Another one you may have heard of is Frank Abagnale. So he was a confidence trickster, check forger, and just general imposter, who, during his career, he claims to have taken 8 different identities. One of them was an airline pilot, which is quite scary. So he was actually on the flight deck of jumbo jets for Pan Am. You've probably heard of him before if you've seen this film, Catch Me If You Can, with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. This is a film basically about Frank Abagnale's life. Fantastic film if you've not seen it, really recommend it. But you know, I think when they finally managed to arrest him, because he was quite a slippery character, he was quite good at evading custody. I think in the end he sort of struck a deal and was sort of spared a long prison sentence if he actually helped the FBI, which is what he does. So there's a shot from the film there where he's Leonardo DiCaprio is basically pretending to be a Pan Am pilot. Quite how he got away with that, I don't know. That's quite amazing. And the other one you might have heard of is Charles Ponzi and the Ponzi scheme, or the pyramid selling scheme. So he started off by basically selling or buying international reply coupons and then swapping them for stamps, which had a higher value. So he was basically creaming money off the top. But he started getting greedy and encouraging lots of people into this scheme that he created. And he was at the time making about £200,000 a day, or well, $200,000 a day, I should say. Which back at the time, well, I mean, it is a lot of money now, but back then it was an insane amount of money. He finally got caught out when I think it was the Boston Globe newspaper started doing some investigations into his tax affairs, and they basically got him that way. Okay, so social engineering techniques. So there's typically 4 stages that you're going to go through with software engineering. Software engineering? Social engineering. Software engineering's next door. So we have information gathering, pretexting, elicitation, and finally manipulation. So we'll start with information gathering, and it's commonly called in the industry open source intelligence, or OSINT. Typically when you watch programs or read books about spies, they call it human intelligence or HUMINT, whereas this is open source intelligence. It's using information out in the wild that's publicly available to build up a profile of your target. So social engineering does take a lot of time and practice and effort to pull off. You don't just go immediately into someone and start trying to con them, because you'll get found out pretty quickly. So you want to get information about people. Now, a common way of doing it is by going through people's rubbish. They call it dumpster diving, because literally you are diving in dumpsters trying to find information. Now, this could be done at corporate headquarters, the office. You'd be amazed at how much important information is disposed of in an unsecure manner. If you're working on a project and you've got a printed copy of a design document for your project, and the project manager issues a new version, you're probably just going to throw the old version in the bin because it has no value to you. But someone who's trying to build a profile of people and projects in a company, that's incredibly valuable. Social networks are a bloody nightmare for leaking information. So a lot of people tend to accidentally, well, they certainly used to accidentally post stuff publicly on Facebook instead of restricting their profile. So you can get lots of information about people. So if you want to know who they're married to, how many kids they've got, what they do for a job, what they like to do on holiday, are they actually in their house or are they away on holiday at that time? You can find all that sort of information out from social media. Twitter as well can help you find out an interesting profile about people's political beliefs or religion or any kind of ideologies, because people tend to overshare on places like Twitter. So if you're trying to get some information to basically try and threaten them or con them, you can basically find out their sort of thoughts and values easily from Twitter. But the biggest one is LinkedIn, because obviously LinkedIn, it's a CV, isn't it? It's your online CV. So people always try to make themselves sound really good on LinkedIn, so you tend to overshare information about what you did in your roles. So you might talk about projects that you worked on, you might even refer to the project by name. But also you can, with a little bit of clicking around, you can find out who your co-workers are, what teams you've worked on, what years you worked there, and that's incredibly valuable. And plus, Google, Bing, or whatever your search engine of choice is, you can just go and Google people's names these days. You'll be amazed at what you'll find. That little innocuous thing you posted on a forum 20 years ago, it's still there. Another way of gathering information is by getting malware onto people's machines. So keyloggers is a prime example. Very simple piece of software. I imagine for most people in this room are software engineers, you can probably write your own without too much difficulty. But you can basically find out people's usernames and passwords fairly easily if they're manually typing them in and not using a password manager. Another one that's quite common is remote screenshotting tools, which will basically just every 10 seconds take a screenshot on your machine and post it to a server somewhere. So if you're trying to see information on people's screens, emails, confidential documents, it's like the modern equivalent of the spies having those little cameras. They take pictures of things. Shoulder surfing is another good way of getting information, literally just looking over someone's shoulder. This is quite big on public transport as well, because if you're, in the before times when you may have been getting the train to work, you're sitting there with your laptop open just trying to get a bit of email done, read some emails before you get to the office. All you need is someone in the seat behind you just peeking around the seat and they can see what you're working on. So if you're doing anything confidential, so if you work in the government or pharmaceuticals or any company like that, you really don't want to be doing work in a public place. This is a good solution though. These are called privacy scarves. You can actually buy these, they're quite cool. You might look a bit weird sitting there with one of these. When I used to be more in the corporate enterprise world, when I was doing people's one-to-ones and appraisal notes, some companies actually gave us these little screens that you put over your monitor, which means that you can only see the screen if you're looking directly on at the screen. They were quite good. But a little tip for managers is if you are writing one-to-one notes or appraisal notes with people, is do it in a different room so people can't look behind your shoulder. Because I've had that before, producing a report on someone and they keep hovering around your desk trying to see what you're writing. Another good way of getting information is by just finding out where they like to drink and just sitting near them and listening to them talk. So I did a version of this talk for a large bank at Canary Wharf once, and I spoke to the person who was organising it, and I said, where do the people who are going to be coming to this talk go for lunch? And they told me, so I went for lunch there, and I sort of I knew what their ID cards looked like, so I sort of sat around and I just tried to hear what people are saying. It's amazing how bitchy people can be about their bosses when they're in a bar. And I took a few sort of sneaky photos as well, and I put them in the slide deck. So when I started talking about this particular part, I was like, yes, I was in this bar earlier. Look, are you in the room? Yes. It was funny. Probably morally dubious thinking back at it, but it was fun at the time. Okay, so once you've gathered information on your target, you then want to kind of figure out how you're going to use that information against them. And this is a process called pretexting. So it's the practice of presenting oneself as someone else in order to obtain private information. So you're acting, lying, deceiving, whatever you want to call it. Catfishing is another term that's used for it. It's probably one that people might be familiar with. So catfishing is basically someone, pretending to be someone that they're not. So the official definition is a deceptive activity where a person creates a fictional persona or fake identity on social networking services, usually targeting a specific victim. So a common one is like dating sites, so Plenty of Fish. When you have a dating sites, you get someone, making out as if they look like Brad Pitt, and actually they don't. But it's used as a way of trying to get dates with people that are maybe out of your league. So pretexting principles. So planning and research generally tends to lead to success. So this is something that takes time to do. If you can find out people's interests, like their hobbies and what they're into, that makes pulling this off quite a bit easier because you can build up a rapport with someone. Does this microphone keep cutting out? So if you know what football team they support, or if they're into model railways or Lego or whatever, it's a really good way of building up a bit of a rapport with someone. Because you're not going to go in and try and directly get something from someone. You're going to maybe spend a few days, a few weeks, months, or even years getting to know these people first in extreme cases. So good acting definitely helps. Obviously, if you don't want to have acting skills like from a Michael Bay movie, because otherwise you're going to get found out. And also keep it simple. Try not to overexert yourself in your acting. And also using information that needs no verification. So the last thing you want to do is to mention something and then the person go, actually, really? Is that the case? And then they try and question what you're saying. So it requires a lot of planning. So obviously you need to know what it is you're trying to do. You need to know what your ultimate goal is. And in some sort of large examples of corporate espionage, effectively, you very rarely have a single social engineer just going after one person. They may have a bigger goal over here, but they need to go through these people and these companies first to get to where they want to be. So it can take time. And a lot of the time, just being friendly and nice to someone is a good technique because we like being friendly and nice. Well, I hope we do. So another definition here. So social engineering is the clever manipulation of the human tendency to trust. So trust being the operative word there. You're trying to build trust with someone, build a rapport. Okay, so next is elicitation. So elicitation is the act of getting information without directly asking for it. So you have a persona that you put together, your pretexting plan, and you're now going to try and use that persona to elicit information from someone. But you're not going to walk up to someone and go, hey Jeff, give us your password. You're going to try and indirectly get it from them. So elicitation is all about exploiting human nature. Most people want to be polite. Most people want to appear well informed. And this is a really good technique against maybe more junior members of staff in a company who are trying to work their way up the corporate ladder. Because if you can maybe, in a large organisation, pretend that you're an executive in that organisation, then people of a lower grade or less experience in a company are going to be more eager to try and make it sound like they know what they're doing. And so they're probably going to overshare information. And generally, a lot of people want to feel appreciated. So if you go in with smaller requests first, but then make them feel really good about helping you with something, then people are going to be more likely to share in the future because they like that feeling of being appreciated. And also, most people are generally honest and don't really want to lie or withhold information. So if you're just nice to someone and treat them with respect, then they're probably going to tell you things that they're not supposed to. So to succeed, then, it's all about learning how to communicate with people. It's psychology, it's human nature. And you need to be able to adapt your communication to fit a given situation. So no situation is ever going to be the same. So you may have a target that you've marked that you're going to try and elicit information from. And it might just happen that on that day they're having a really bad day, so they're being a bit snarky. So maybe your initial plan of trying to get information from them is not going to work. So you may need to think, well, I need to kind of adapt what I'm doing here because I'm just not going to succeed. Success is all about building a bond with the target. We've talked about that quite a few times. And it's important to stay in character of your pretext as well. I read one example where a guy was trying to get some information out of a woman, and he was coming across, kind of like a catfishing thing in a way, that he was single and he was trying to, woo this young lady. But then one time he actually turned up and he forgot to take his wedding ring off, which is a disaster from a social engineering point of view. But it's also slightly awkward as well if you're claiming to be single and actually you're not. You can imagine how those conversations go down. And it's also about the effective use of questioning techniques. Now, I imagine quite a lot of you, if you've had to sit through corporate communications courses in your companies, have probably had this drilled into you. But essentially, there's 3 types of questions when you're talking to someone. So you've got open, closed, and leading. So an open-ended question, basically, you're trying to get a meaningful answer out of someone. So if I say, tell me about your relationship with your father, you could, go on for hours maybe giving an answer to that. Or how do you feel about the election candidates? That's always a fun one to do down the pub. People are going to give you a big, long, meaningful answer. So closed questions are where you're trying to get more of a direct answer out of someone. So using the examples of the questions before, so if I say, do you get on with your father? Well, that's a yes or a no answer really, isn't it? Or who are you going to vote for? A very direct answer. And then we have leading questions, and this is where you're trying to subtly prompt someone in how you want them to answer a particular question. So if I say to you, do you have any problems with your boss? I'm kind of implying that you may have problems. You may not, but then you might think, well, actually, he makes a rubbish cup of tea. It's kind of prompting you to think about the negative aspects of your boss. Or if you say, how fast was the red car going when it smashed into the blue car? So there you're kind of implying that the red car was at fault in the way you've framed that question. Actually, it might not have been the red car. It might have been the blue car that drove into the red car. So when you're trying to get information out of someone, you typically do what's called funneling. So you'll start off with lots of open questions. That's how we have conversation. When you meet new people, generally it's going to be hours and hours of you just asking questions to each other. That's typically how we learn about people. But then once you've gone through that, you might start asking more direct or closed questions. So you're trying to narrow them down to a specific answer. And as a last resort, you may use leading questions where you effectively try and manipulate their thought process and get them to answer in a way that's beneficial to you. Okay, so we've got pretexting, which is taking on a persona, and we've got elicitation, which is using that persona to extract information. So the next bit is manipulation. This is one of those subjects where we could spend days going through different manipulation techniques. I'm going to talk a few common ones. Some people tend to use manipulation and influencing in the same sentence, but there's a kind of a difference between the two. So if you're trying to influence someone, you're trying to change their mind in a way that's good for them. Whereas if you're manipulating them, you're trying to change their mind in a way that's not good for them. So if you're influencing someone, it should be a win-win scenario for both people. Whereas if you're manipulating someone, it's a win-lose. So it's a win for you, the manipulator, and a loss for them. It's an example of influencing. So if you're going out drinking, for example, and you might try and persuade your friend to leave his car keys at home or her car keys at home. That's you influencing them to do something that's in their best interest. Whereas if you're trying to extort money out of someone by threatening them or spreading rumours about them, that's a win for you, the social engineer, but a loss for them. So that's kind of it's a subtle difference between the two. So manipulation is generally bad, but obviously for a social engineer, it's kind of your bread and butter. It's one of your prime techniques. So some interesting techniques then. So gaslighting is probably one that people are more familiar with from a more domestic setting. So gaslighting is kind of where you're trying to make someone question their own reality, and you do it by sort of coercive control over time. When I was looking for some stock libraries on this, I came across this brilliant blog post with this image on it. So I thought, oh, I'm stealing that. And there's a link at the bottom. It's a website called blessingmanifesting.com. A really interesting article if you want to sort of take a photograph of it and go and read it. But this diagram is pretty good. So it says gaslighting is a form of manipulation and abuse centred around making someone doubt reality. It involves blatant lying or constant cover-ups. And you're denying conversations or events ever happened. So, you're lying. So if say a partner says, oh, you did this last week. You're like, no, I didn't. You're trying to make someone question their reality. So you're effectively manipulating others to see you differently. And then basically what you're doing is you're eroding someone's self-esteem over time. It's quite nasty when you think about it. It's horrible. And then typically your actions will contradict the words, so broken promises effectively. And it leaves you with a feeling like you have to defend your own reality. So this is very common in domestic settings. Generally you don't know it's happening because these sorts of conversations happen behind closed doors. But for a social engineer, if you're trying to build up a rapport with someone over time, then this will be one of the things you're trying to do. You're trying to subtly change someone's mind, make them question what they may already know over time. So fear, good old-fashioned fear, is a manipulation technique. And it's typically called the fear and relief technique. So we mentioned it before, where if you phone someone up and you try and give them some really shocking information that's going to put their guard up and get them scared, but then you immediately offer a relief to that problem. So you're offering to make that problem go away. So in the example of the bank phoning you up and saying that your account's been compromised and we need to move your money into a secondary account temporarily, that's been in the news quite a lot recently. You've gone in there, you said there's a problem, your savings are at risk, we can help you immediately if we do these steps now. And then before you know it, you've lost all your savings. Now, another example is tech support. So if you, in the office, back when we used to work in offices, you get a phone call from tech support saying that they've detected some malware or a virus on your machine. We can remote into your machine and install something to get rid of it straight away. You're like, oh yeah, please, thank you. Don't want to lose my work. But really, you've given them access into a machine to install a keylogger, for example. Oh, my notes have popped back. That's good. Right. This is an interesting one that you can use as a manipulation technique. Well, I'm not saying you should do it, but in the context of what we're saying, is simply threatening to spread rumours about people. Because whether we like it or not, we all like a few rumours in the office and a bit of gossip. So if you start spreading a rumour that Jeff is having it away with Barbara in accounts, it doesn't matter if it's true. Once you started spreading the rumour, it's going to spread, because people generally don't care whether it's true or not in an office setting. They just want to spread the rumour because it's fun. Horrible, but fun. So if you're trying to manipulate someone, you can just threaten to spread any old rubbish about them. So if you're working in a kind of a restricted environment where you have to be vetted, for example, and then you spread a rumour that someone's an alcoholic or dependent on drugs, and that could be damaging to their career. Doesn't matter if it's true. So that's a popular technique. Similar to that is guilt, so using guilt as a way of getting someone to comply. And you might do this by trying to do them a favour, help them out with something at the start of your elicitation process, and then you use that as a way of guilt tripping them into helping you further down the line. So for an example here, so I need to copy these files. Help me, or I'll tell your wife, husband, partner or boss about your affair, drinking, drugs problem. Delete as appropriate. And another common one is what's called the foot in the door technique, common used by salespeople when you get salesmen knocking on your door trying to sell you something. So asking the victim to do a very small request first, and then once they say yes or comply, you then use it as a way of getting them to do something for you or buy something for you. So a common one is like if you homeless people on the street, for example, they might stop you and ask you the time, and you stop and tell them the time, then they've got you there, you've answered them, then they'll ask you for money. That's called the foot in the door technique. Those are just a few simple manipulation techniques, and there's lots and lots and lots. There's books, huge tomes written on manipulation and how you can basically try and engineer scenarios with people. So how can we protect ourselves against it? So protection is actually quite easy, and a lot of it is just down to good common sense, which is good. There's no real magic to it. So we're going to talk a bit about personal mitigation and then about sort of corporate mitigation. So common targets, could be junior staff, new people in a company, very eager to please and to be seen as doing a good job. So you can kind of use that to your advantage. Contractors in an organisation, they don't have the same level of vested interest in the organisation as what a full-time member of staff does, so they could be potentially malleable. Admin staff and support staff as well. You may think, that's a fairly low-level job in an organisation, but actually people in those positions tend to have a lot of power because they have access to a lot of information. Or if you have a member of support staff for an executive in an organisation, instead of going for the executive, you can go for their assistant instead, because it'll probably be easier. So personal mitigation techniques, certainly if you're at work, I don't know if anyone's back in their office yet, but if you ever do go back to an office and you see someone walking around the office that you don't recognise, a good thing to do is just ask them for ID. I used to work for Boots many years ago down in Beeston, and this was a bit embarrassing at the time, but I recognised someone trying to get through the security gate on D90, the building D90, and they didn't have their pass, and they asked if they could use my pass to come through. And I said no, and I said, who are you? And they tried to claim that they were one of the higher level executives at Boots. Well, I don't know who you are. So I made them walk all the way round in the rain to the front of reception to get a new pass. Turns out they were a fairly high level ranking executive in the organisation. But when I saw the guy again, he did actually say what I did was right. I did the right thing. It was slightly awkward.
Still fired you though.
Well, no, not for that one. Again, if someone phones you up pretending to be someone in the organisation, obviously very popular in huge corporations, you're not going to know everyone in the organisation. So if someone does phone you up, just try and identify who they are. Check on the intranet or whatever directory you have. Maybe say you'll phone them back and then call back the number that's listed in the intranet and not the number they called you with. See if you can get hold of them. It's a way of verifying if someone is actually who they say they are. Also, watching for out-of-character questions. So if you have someone start asking you about, server topology, and you're like, hold on, you're the cleaner, why are you asking me about that? Out-of-character questions can be a big giveaway. So why is this person asking me this? And that's something you always want to think to yourself is, why is this person asking me this particular question? And if it seems out of character, then you don't have to answer. You can go and report it to your manager or security officer. If someone's trying to get you to do a small request, yet they're just bombarding you with information and talking too much, that's a warning sign. This is something that's commonly taught to people in call centres at banks. So if someone's trying to do a transfer from one account to the other over the phone, yet they keep talking to you or they keep giving you too much information, it's probably because they're trying to distract you. So you're not thinking too closely about what you're doing. So the attacker trying to distract you while you're helping them. So they're trying to get you to do what they want you to do, but not think too much about it, so they'll try and keep you talking whilst you're doing it. Of course, you could just get someone who's overly chatty. It's not always going to be the case that someone who's talking too much on the phone is a criminal, but it's just something to bear in mind. So think of the threat level of what that person's asking you to do, and then kind of frame that into context around why they're trying to distract you. Again, don't let guests roam around free in a building. So if you have someone coming to visit you in an organisation, if you ever get back to that situation, don't let them just walk around by themselves. Always make sure they've got a chaperone as best you can. Obviously, you're not going to follow them into the toilet. That'd be a bit awkward. But just don't let them walk around. This is a big one. Don't plug in USB thumb drives that you find on the floor. Especially, if you see one on the floor and you think, oh, it's 0.5 terabyte. That's pretty good. I'll have that. There's documented cases of criminals deliberately dropping thumb drives around organisations, hoping someone will pick it up and then plug it in at their desk, which is bad. So they might actually use a 0.5 terabyte drive as well, because you think, oh, that would have cost me 50 quid on Amazon, and there's one for free on the floor. So never plug one of those in, because it never leads to good things. Also, just being generally aware of what you're saying. Think of the context of where you are. So if you are down at the pub, don't talk about that project that you had to go through security vetting to get assigned to. You have no idea who's listening. And bars, pubs, restaurants are brilliant places for just trying to find out information about people. Especially when they've had a few drinks, because we tend to get a bit loose-lipped when we're drunk. Obvious one. This isn't obvious to everyone. I mean, when I've done this talk to non-technical audiences before, some people are like, oh, you're not supposed to click the links in emails. It's like, just don't click anything. So if you do receive an email from your bank saying you've gone into your overdraft, and you're sitting there thinking, well, actually, I'm a bit lean this month, don't click on the link in the email, go directly to your bank, log in through your normal URL, authenticate, and then check. And you'll easily be able to see whether it's true or not. But typically, banks don't really tend to send those sorts of emails anyway. It's up with the tax office ones. HMRC have already said publicly that they will never phone you to ask about your tax affairs. They will always send you an official letter. So that's a good one to remember. This one's more important now than ever, so shredding documents. So if you're working from home, for example, and you're working on a project and you like to print the project plan out or the project timelines out, and then you want to get rid of it, don't just throw it in your recycle bin. Shred it. You can buy shredders for £15 on Amazon, and it's just a generally good thing to do because what's to stop anyone from going through your recycling? I mean, it's even easier now we do recycling actually because you've basically put all your paper in one nice little box. So you could have bank statements in there, you could have prescription details in there about medication that you're on. You might have some particular embarrassing illness that you don't want anyone to know about. Or if you've got the prescription for the medication there, that could be quite bad. Going back to our old friend USB thumb drives, don't store confidential information on thumb drives because they are very easy to lose. We've had all those cases where government officials have been caught out because they've accidentally left a thumb drive or a hard drive on the train. There was one a little while ago about someone dropped some plans about some of our nuclear submarines. It was left at a bus stop. I don't know if anyone remembers hearing about that one. So it's amazing that these things still happen. Use drive encryption on your laptop. I think most operating systems do this by default now. So on Windows, it's BitLocker. The Mac has its own one, I've forgotten what it's called. But generally these things are turned on by default. It's always good to check that drive encryption is there, just in case someone tries to steal your laptop. Be aware of who's looking over your shoulder. We talked about this earlier, but if you're, even here, if you've got a laptop out and you're typing away on something, could the person sitting behind you be looking at what you're doing? It's where everyone looks around suspiciously at the people around them. Again, back in your office, if you ever go back to an office, it's a simple one, but always lock your machine before you go get your cup of coffee, because you never know who's going to suddenly sit down at your computer and start poking around. And the final one is educate yourself. I mean, talks like this, hopefully you've learned something good from it. Got some book suggestions at the end, so if you really do find this subject interesting, and it is fascinating when you dive into it. But educating yourself on this is pretty good. I've worked in banks before and they do tend to do social engineering training and manipulation training, which is quite good. Okay, so some corporate mitigation ones. This is a bit of an odd one because I wrote this talk years ago in the before times when corporate offices were more of a thing. But something that is worth remembering is that while everyone is loving the idea that they can work from home and they like the freedom of it, to your security officer in your organisation, it's a bloody nightmare. Because you've now got people accessing confidential information about your organisation, probably over crappy Wi-Fi, which has still got a default router password set. So for your security officer, maybe give them a virtual hug next time you see them, because working from home does cause problems for security officers because they can't control the information, they can't control what you do in your own home, which makes it particularly difficult. Which leads on to talking about documents. We said about printing documents out. I always used to prefer printing documents out because I just preferred it on paper. But a lot of the time you don't necessarily know what you can do with that document or what the value of that document is. So something that seems quite innocuous to you, it's a design document for some crud website that you're doing for pulling people's information out of a database. Seems quite boring maybe to you, but to someone who's trying to find out about your organisation and the projects that you're working on, it's very valuable. So a good thing to do is what's called information classification, if the projector ever comes back. Okay. And a simple thing that you can do is actually to put colour codings on the front pages of documents. Governments tend to do this. So a green might mean, this is public information. If it leaks out, it's no problem. It could be like a brochure or sales information. Yellow or amber could be released, but only with authorization. So you know that that document can potentially go outside the organisation, but you need permission from your manager or someone else first. And then red is, company confidential. Do not release ever. And it's a simple thing, but if you've got a little marker on the front of a document, it immediately tells you what you can or can't do with that document. So anything that's amber or red, really you should be shredding it before you dispose of it. If a company doesn't have one of these already, but having a corporate security policy, whilst they are really dull to read, they are really important. Someone gave me a funny look there when I said they're dull. They're really interesting, really. If that's your job writing these, then I apologise. We've all had those documents where you have to read these corporate security things, and then you have to do a multiple choice question on the intranet to say that you've read it. They are important because it does tell you what your expectations are as an employee around data protection, especially in the GDPR world that we're in now. So when your boss tells you to read them, just get it out of the way, read it and understand it. If you're in a small startup and you don't have one of these, then you can get templates on how to write these online, which can sort of get you off to a good start, and it will have like a basic template of what a security policy should be, and then you can tweak it to suit your company. So www.sans.org is the place to get those. All your software and hardware that you use should be regularly patched. Maybe that's not something that you have to deal with yourself, but your organisation should be making sure that you're installing patches frequently, because basically you're trying to patch zero-day exploits, which attackers can use to get malware onto your machine. So it's very important. An organisation should have a document destroying service in their office. Sometimes you get these like confidential waste bins that you put your documents in, and then they get professionally shredded by another organisation. So those bins are there for a purpose, and you should use them if you're ever back in an office. Again, at home, you really want to invest in a document shredder or get your company to buy you a document shredder. And finally, never assume that your company is too small to be a target. So you might think, people are going to go after Amazon, or they're going to go after British Gas, or a large company, but that's not necessarily the case. Getting information or manipulating people in smaller startups, for example, is a lot easier because they don't tend to have a very high level of security, either around their software systems or around the people that work there. Okay, this is really annoying, that projector, but we're near the end. So we'll try and get you out to the lunch queue quicker. So social engineering, just to summarise, is the act of influencing someone to take an action that may not be in their best interest. So you're trying to manipulate someone, and you're doing it through a pretext or a persona that you invent, and you then use elicitation to try and get that information from them. And as part of that elicitation, you might use manipulation techniques. Talked a little bit about different types of social engineers, and they can come in any form. I still think recruiters are some of the most devious, personally. So again, people do it because it consistently works. Trying to break password files or get through intrusion detection systems and firewalls is hard. These systems are designed to be hopefully impenetrable. People aren't. So your company may have spent £100,000 on a Barracuda firewall, but if you've got an assistant who knows the password into a particular system. A really good example, actually, that I read about was a disgruntled DBA in an organisation who had been passed up for a promotion, was quite pissed off about it. So they wanted to get their own back, so they have production database access, probably the most dangerous thing that anyone can have in an organisation. So what do? They select star a load of tables, export it as a CSV file, pop it onto a thumb drive and take the data home with them. Something that's very, very easy to do. You don't need massive technical skills to get information out of a database. You just view the table or export the table as a CSV file, and you've got all that information. And then 6 months later, you get an email from Troy Hunt saying that your details have been pwned. Yeah, so people are the biggest vulnerability in any network, and it sounds like a horrible thing to say, doesn't it? That people are easy to manipulate and they're a vulnerability, but they are. That's just the nature of business. And again, it offers a path of least resistance. It's easier to get information out of someone than it is to get it directly from a computer system. Now, there is a much darker side to some of this as well, because you've got cases where, especially like sort of spying and all that, where you could just kidnap someone and start removing fingers until they give them what you want. Didn't cover that too much in this one, because there's rules about what you can say in these conferences. But, it happens. Okay, yeah, so those are the 4 main steps. If we can see them, yep, information gathering, pretexting, elicitation, and manipulation. So everything can normally be broken down into a series of 4 boxes, and that's the case here. The mitigation techniques we covered, again, none of them are particularly difficult. There's nothing that's going to be outside the ability of anyone in this room. It just gives you some things to think about. Is someone asking you something that's out of character? If yes, question it or report it. Someone phones you at the office that you don't recognise, try and validate who they are and verify them. Be aware of who's around you when you're out. And even better, just don't talk about projects when you're in a bar. It's normally a good one. Okay, so got some resources that you might find good. I've got a course on Pluralsight that I did a while ago with Lars Klint, where we talk about a lot of the things that we discussed here, but we do it in a jovial way through chit-chat. It's quite good fun to film. 3 books by Kevin Mitnick. I highly recommend reading them. They're fairly easy reads. They're not massively technical books, but they're fascinating. You read some of the things he got up to. It's quite eye-opening. If you want to buy a really big, impressive book to put on your desk to make everyone think that you're really clever, then this book's great. Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking. It's the book I read that kind of inspired me to write this talk, to try and distill some of this information down. It is a very information-dense book. There's a lot in there. But it is probably the manual on social engineering. So highly recommend that. And we didn't really cover body language because we haven't got time, but there's a brilliant book here called What Everybody is Saying, written by an ex-FBI interrogator. And he talks about how you can basically read people like a book just by how they act. So if you're in a room with someone, like you're doing a one-to-one, and you notice that their feet are pointed towards the door, it means they're uncomfortable and anxious and want to get out of there. If people have got sweaty hands and they're rubbing their legs, it's a sign of anxiety. If someone's steepling their hands like that, it's a sign of confidence. He talks about all these different things. He's got some interesting stories where he talks about how they managed to catch out a murderer that they were struggling to convict, just by recording him and looking at how he moved his eyes when he was questioned. So it's a fascinating book. So yeah, that's it. I'm Stephen Haunts. I do training, mostly online at the minute. I've got my first in-person workshop at the end of November, which is exciting and terrifying at the same time. Not quite sure how I feel about that. I've written some books as well. I like writing, I like typing. One on the left is about starting businesses and entrepreneurship for people that are scared to run businesses. Not everyone's a natural entrepreneur. Some people like the idea of it, but are generally quite terrified. So this book kind of helps you with that. And I've got a book called The Art of Conversation, which is aimed at people who are maybe a bit more socially anxious, and it's about how to help them have meaningful conversations with people that they wouldn't ordinarily talk to. So with that, thank you. I hope I've not left you too paranoid. People are generally nice, but obviously there are dodgy people out there who are trying to get information from you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.